Welcome to the program, everyone, and really pleased to be doing part two of our interview with James Muir, author of The Perfect Close. And today we're going to talk to James about the perfect close. We're going to get right into the details of the technique. So, James, welcome back.
Thanks for having me back, Stephen. It's great to be here. Like I said, you've got an illustrious list of guests that you've had on the show, so I'm glad to join the party.
Excellent. Great to have you here again. And I'm going to quote from your book, James, from the introduction. And it's a really great book. If anyone hasn't read it yet, get The Perfect Close. It's got great technique, but it's very well written. And you'll get a sense when I read this. The book opens with, did you know there is a method to closing that is nearly always successful in the 95% range? Is zero pressure for you and your client and involves just two questions. So if that doesn't get you in and doesn't get you interested to study this technique, I don't know what would. So James, really well done. You really set the book up well there. I was really on the edge of my seat to understand this thing that's a 95% success involves just two questions. Come on, tell us what it's all about.
But I have to ask you before I share that. Later on in that introduction, I say, hey, if you just want to cut to the chase, you can go right to chapter 12 and read it, and you'll have it, right?
Exactly.
You'll have it like in 10 minutes. So were you one of the readers? Were you one of the readers that jumped to chapter 12, or were you one of the readers that waited and read all the way up to chapter 12?
No, I go straight to dessert.
And was it good? It was good enough for you to go back to the beginning, it sounds like.
Then I did go back and read the rest of it. Don't worry. But so I think we covered a lot of the platform in our first interview. Now this is the dessert part. All
right. Well, let's talk about the two questions that are 95% successful. So maybe before we start, it would be worth saying that before you go into any situation, any circumstance, right, a meeting, you should have an idea of what you want to happen as a result of your meeting, right? You should have, and what I would say is you want to have an ideal advance and a couple of alternative advances. And we mentioned this for last time, but I'll just mention it here. Yep. Neil Rackham coined a couple phrases that are like important contributions to the world of selling. And one of those is the term advance. Basically, the simple definition of an advance is it's moving the sell forward in a little way. A little way. And so depending on what you sell, there might be a lot of little steps before you get to the really big step, right? And so before we go into any meeting, we should have an ideal advance, right? What the best thing that could happen, and we want to have a couple of alternatives just in case it turns out that the ideal thing that we think should happen isn't right for the customer at that time. Okay, and so that's kind of, you can think of it as a backup plan, right? Okay. And an interesting fact that we mentioned last time is that a whole lot of
we don't know how the meeting will go, right? The meeting could go this way, it could go that way. And I know I've been in situations where you actually have a goal of going to the next step in the process, and you're meeting with maybe the CEO or someone, some high level person in the account. And you're thinking of the next step, but the CEO is very aggressive. He wants to implement this thing in the next 60 days and wants to, you've got to be prepared for like an acceleration sometimes.
Yes, it can go either way.
Out the window.
Yeah, it could be they want to go faster than you were ready for, and it could be that they want to go slower.
They want to go slower, sure. So be ready for those situations. Yeah, sure.
So we want to be able to throttle our efforts, right? So that we're going to match and pace the customer so that it's comfortable for them, right? Obviously, it's the best when they want to go fast. We love that. So an interesting stat is that most sales encounters, somewhere between 50 and 90%, it actually changes, it varies depending on the industry that you're in. 50 to 90% of all sales encounters end without any commitment being asked for whatsoever, which is wild. So that's the reason that we're planning this in advance, is we don't want to be in that 50 to 90%. And the reason I think, we mentioned this last time, that it's that high is that because most of the methods that salespeople have been taught over the years on how to advance the sale are actually manipulative. And since we're not comfortable saying it, what most salespeople do is they just do nothing. That's why 59% nothing's happening. So you've got this ideal advance, you've got a couple of alternative advances, right? And with that, then it's really easy to do this with zero pressure and a really high probability of success, okay? And so there's two questions, and sometimes you might only need one question, right? So the first question of the perfect close is this, does it make sense to X? where X
Okay.
is our ideal advance. Okay. So let me just give you an example. So from my revenue cycle years, we would always do an assessment for the customer. So we might say, hey, does it make sense for us to schedule an assessment to see what our best options are?
Okay.
Right. So in that example, the assessment is the X, right?
Sure.
Now, there's only two things they can say, right, Steve? Is they're going to say yes or they're going to say no to that. And if they say yes, then cha-ching, right? We just got our ideal advance and we didn't even have to ask the second question,
Sure.
right? So we get our calendars out. On the other hand, if they say no, then we're just going to ask one of the follow-up questions. And sort of the kindergarten version, the first version of that is, okay, well, what do you think is a good next step? Okay. And what I can tell you, it sounds so simple, right, that you can't believe that we're sharing it, right? But and when people read the book, they do the same thing. They go like, oh, it's just too easy. I couldn't believe that I wasn't doing this. But what I can tell you, I've done hundreds and hundreds of ride-alongs with salespeople where they know I'm expecting them to ask the question, right? And so I'm waiting. And what I can tell you is when they ask that second question, okay, well, what do you think is a good next step then? What happens in 90% of the cases is the customer just suggests a very logical and appropriate next step for where they're at right now in their buying process. Okay. And the best close is really one that paces at the rate that the other person's ready for. And by doing it this way, we're pacing the sale at exactly the rate that the customer's ready for, right? It's when we try to push them faster than they're ready for. That's when it starts to feel like manipulation to them, right? But doing it this way, like you said before, it's very simple, but it's also completely non-confrontational. They don't feel like they're getting pressured. That's the first piece of this, right? And maybe it's worth digging down because when I share this with people initially, what happens is they're worried about what happens when the customer says no. That's really what they're. But if we look at the nuance of what's really going on from a psychology perspective, you'll see why this is so perfect over all the other different methods out there. Okay, so when we said, does it make sense? Okay, let's just say the customer says no.
So it's interesting. You're starting with sort of a closed question, and then you follow up. If that's a no, then you go to an open question.
Wide open.
You're taking the pressure off, right? And
Correct.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
And we can still tweak it a little bit. So there's some upgrades that we'll do here in just a second.
Oh yeah, sure.
But I want to share with the audience. Think about it. If you say, "Hey, does it make sense for us to X?" and they say no, well, what did they really say no to? Did they say no? I'm not going to buy your stuff. No, because we didn't ask them to buy any. Sure. Did they say, no, I'm not going to take your course of action? No, we didn't ask them to take a course of action. We only asked if it made sense. So at its core, does it make sense is really a timing question, right? And so the customer can't really ever reject the course of action at all. They can only reject the timing of it. And that is a very subtle but very important difference between will you buy my stuff or does it make sense for us to do something, right? It's very, very different, right? And the outcome and the emotion that's involved when they say no to will you buy my stuff and they say no, you've tanked your emotion. But if I say, hey, does it make sense for us to do X? And they say no, then my emotion level is still right at the good level. I can just throw it right back and say, okay, well, what do you think is a good next step right now? Right? And so that leaves us emotionally on much, much higher ground. Now, there's a couple ways we can trick it out. Okay, we can make this better. So in my space, people buy what they buy maybe once in a lifetime. Okay, if they're lucky, maybe twice in a lifetime. So people aren't very experienced at buying the stuff that we do.
Like
and that's
large,
true,
complex, I think. Company changing systems or completely changing the process. Yep, sure. That's quite common across tech. Yep.
Agreed. Right. And so, but I also would say there's a lot of other industries where, I only have bought one vinyl fence in my lifetime. Yeah. So I think it's true that I don't know how to buy a vinyl fence. And so one of the things we can do is called the suggestion. And so instead of just saying, hey, does it make sense for us to X, we could help them a little bit by letting them know what's an appropriate next step. So we could say, hey, does it make, other clients at this stage sometimes do X. Does it make sense for us to do that? Okay. And what I'm trying to get across here is that, do you see how facilitative that is, right? We're just saying, hey, I know you don't do this all the time. And so other clients typically do this as a next step. Does that make sense for you? And if they say yes, awesome, we get it. If not, well, then we can do another variation, which is called the fallback. And the reason we prepared 3 advances at least is so that if the ideal advance doesn't work, we can say, okay, well, other clients at this stage sometimes also do, Y. Yeah. Does it make sense for us to do Y? And again, we're just facilitating here, right? And you could fall back an infinite number of times. I wouldn't recommend that you fall back more than twice, or it'll start to look self-serving. So in that model, what we do is we say, does it make sense to X? If they say no, we say, well, clients at this stage sometimes do Y. Does it make sense to do that? And if they say no to that, we might just throw them the ball back. And we say, hey, well, what do you think is a good next step? Okay, so that's the fallback. But let's use your example, right? So the CEO wants to go, he's gangbusters, right? And he wants to go. So we would use a model there called the add-on. And what the add-on is instead of falling back to our advances, we're going to stack them on instead. So we say, hey, does it make sense for us to do X? And they say, yes. I'm like, awesome. Well, does it make sense for us to do Y? Sometimes clients at this stage also do Y. Do you want to do that? They say yes, cha-ching, great. Then we ask them Z. Hey, sometimes clients will also do Z. Do you want to do that? If they say yes or they say no, no matter what you do at the end of the add-on, you say this. Instead of, with the fallback, we end with, what do you think is a good next step? With the add-on, you end up with, are there any other logical steps we should be considering right now? Okay, and that what that does is that gives the customer a chance to add additional advances that you maybe didn't think of. And I'll tell you this crazy thing that happened to me and my team. We were working with a hospital down in Sierra Vista, Arizona. We actually thought we were presenting to the wrong people. So our ideal advance was to meet with the executive team because that's who we thought was going to make the purchasing decision. And so we did our whole thing and we asked him, say, hey, does it make sense for us to, share this with your executive team so we can get their feedback? He goes, yes, that's a great idea. I'm like, woo, cha-ching, right? Okay. So then I said, well, sometimes clients will want our technical teams to talk to each other to talk about the conversion. Does it make sense for us to schedule a time for our tech teams to meet? That was my second advance. He goes, that's a great idea. We're really concerned about that. I'm like, cha-ching, wow, I got number 2, right? So the third thing on my list was a proposal. So I said, well, I think I've got enough here to create a preliminary proposal. Does it make sense for me to put together a sort of a preliminary proposal so you can get a feel for the scope of the project? And he goes, yes, that would be a great idea. We can get our head around the budget. And so I'm like, wow, I'm spent 3 for 3, right? So I throw this guy the final question, which is, all right, well, is there anything else we should be thinking about right now? And what this guy says will blow your mind. He kind of lowers his voice a little bit and he goes, well, James, our legal people can be kind of slow. Is there any chance that we could get a copy of your contract?
Oh, okay.
Okay. So on the outside, I'm like, why, yes, of course I could get you a copy of our agreement. On the inside, I'm going like, yeah, baby, are you kidding me? Right? That's like the best possible thing he could have said.
He's going to give you a buying signal and sort of flash above his head.
Yeah. I'm like, amazing, right? And so here's the thing. We didn't even think we were presenting to the right people.
Right.
Yet we walked out of there with 4 advances, one of which we would have never even dreamed would be possible. And I would say this, imagine that I went in there on the first advance. I said, hey, do you want me, should I send you a contract? I think it would have come off wrong. Right. But because we paced it
too assumptive or presumptive. Yes,
exactly. And so that's the magic of doing it this way, is that by pacing it at the rate that they're ready for,
pick something that you gauge is probably the most probable next step. And then don't start off up here. Go up there if they're reacting that way and move down if you have to as well.
That's the beauty of it, right? And so this was a huge win. But again, we're just, if they want to go slower, we go a little slower. If they want to go faster, we go a little faster. Yeah. And so the perfect close lets us do that in a way that's non-confrontational and it doesn't feel like any pressure. So I can't even tell you the number of consultants and technical people that have to sell, that hate selling, that once we've shared them with them this process, they're like, oh, wow, it's like I've taken a load off of their shoulders because they realize that they can still move their process forward without looking, slimy.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Hey, James, I've got a question for you. I've had situations where the customer has accelerated, but then they've probably jumped over a lot of necessary steps to get proper alignment in their organization because they're not experienced at buying. They go, oh, Steve, this looks awesome. We're ready to go. Just get us a proposal. And then you find that it doesn't go anywhere in the organization. Do you have any tips for how to manage that? Like, we have to be a bit wary when someone's that aggressive.
Yes. So I'll give you 2 comments on that. So the first is there are some steps you cannot skip, even if the customer wants to skip them. Yep. You can't skip them. The fact that they're asking you, though, tells you something. That is that you have an extremely high level of trust with this customer right now. And that is an important thing that you have to have as a salesperson. If you've got that level of trust, it means, you know what, James, I know you're going to take care of me. So I don't have to dot my I's and cross my T's right now. Let's just get right to the end. I know you'll take care of me. And
Right.
and so you got to use that trust with great a deal of responsibility as a
Okay.
salesperson. Right? And
Yeah.
if this is happening to you, that means that you're a great salesperson. But at the same time, you're not just talking to one person here. There's a whole organization that we have to deal with, and we got
Right.
to make sure that all the steps. So we don't skip steps is the really short version of this, is that even though there are things that need to be done, we would want to, like, it's very common. We have to give other presentations to other people, even though honestly, the decision's already been made. We're just trying to onboard all the rest of the people so we don't get any kind of roadblocks when it happens during the implementation stage.
Yes.
So that's, I mean, I could talk quite a bit on that, but my answer is, that's a good sign when that happens, because it means they trust you. At the same time, you really don't want to, there are some steps you could potentially skip, but others you cannot skip because it creates risk in the opportunity after it's closed.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, okay. Yeah, let's move on the path towards getting this done quickly. But in parallel, in our experience, these deals work best, or this sort of implementation works best if we get other stakeholders involved, if we build the business case in this way, really helping them to buy more effectively.
And that's even true in small sales about stakeholders, right? If the husband, you're selling to the husband, but the wife doesn't know, she can veto, believe me, she can veto.
Yeah, absolutely. That happens all the time.
There's one variation of the perfect close we didn't talk about that your group might be interested in, and that is what we call the something special version of the perfect close. And it might be worth telling you how it came around. So I remember, I'm older than I look. And so I remember when I was first a rep and I was working for a publicly traded company, and instead of using computer systems, we had a dry erase board that had all the opportunities on it.
Yes.
And I remember one quarter I had a whiteboard that had 10 different opportunities on it, all of which were kind of running a process. One of them was almost ready to close, and the rest were somewhere in the middle. And so we get a call from above, right, from corporate saying, hey, we're having a particularly challenging quarter. You're welcome to use any discounts that you want up to this level to try to encourage. And so they actually encouraged me to offer discounts to all 10, in order to get them to close by the end of the quarter. So being a mindless brand new sales rep, I went and I offered discounts to all 10 of those. Now, Stephen, what percentage of those do you think actually closed? I'll tell you. I'll tell you.
Yeah, tell me.
One closed. Okay. Anyway? And which one do you think it was? It was the one that was already ready to close before we started offering discounts to everybody, right? Yeah. So, being wise, I continued to run the process on the other 9 into the next quarter, and ultimately closed a total of 8 out of 10, which is amazing, right?
Oh, wow.
But for every one of those deals, I had to have this awkward conversation with them about whether or not they were going to get that same discount that they saw the previous quarter.
Yes.
And we had told them flat out, you'll never see this discount if you don't close before the end of the quarter, right? That was the way we were offering the discount. Yeah, it's contingent on you closing before the end of the quarter. But they'd all say, well, gosh, James, if it was worth it to you before, why isn't it worth it to you now? And if I would resist, you could literally see the tangible erosion of goodwill in their faces. Absolutely. Okay. So here's the crazy thing. Before the end of that quarter, the exact same fire drill. Corporate calls us. They said, we're having a tough quarter. You're okay to discount. They used to call it weapons free. They'd say, you're now weapons free, meaning you can discount in order to close business. And so fortunately, I was able to offer the same discounts that I was before. And so that saved the day, and I was able to bring those deals in. But it got me thinking, man, there's got to be some way to find out if a customer can close within a given time frame without telegraphing any kind of a discount, right? That's what, because for example, the one that was going to close anyway, I just gave margin away on that one, right? And then the other ones, we all gave margin away. If they hadn't seen the discount the previous quarter, they wouldn't have even asked me for discount the second quarter, right? Yeah. I'm thinking there's got to be a way to do that. So that's how this something special version of the perfect close is. And so here's the magic phrase, okay? Does it make sense to see if we can do something special for you, if we can get things done by your time frame and a quarter, right? So let me say it again. Does it make sense for us to see if we can get something special done for you if we can get everything wrapped up by the end of the quarter? You don't tell them what the something special is, because all we're trying to find out right now is the timing. Okay. And so they'll ask you, they'll say, well, what's the something special? And you'll say, Well, I don't really know until I talk to my execs, but our CEO said he'd be willing to work with customers if we can get everything wrapped up by the end of the quarter. Okay.
Mm.
So you basically are what's called reverting to higher authority with your answer about what the something
Yes.
special is, right? But what you could do one more thing. You could say, well, all right, just to speed the process up a bit, is there any area in the proposal where you'd get more value out of it than another? Okay.
Mm.
And what I can tell you from personal experiences, very often salespeople, especially new salespeople, always go for the discount. They think that that is the thing that the customer values the most. But in reality, customers very often value other things more than discounts. And
Right.
so I've done this and people have said, oh, we need training, right? Could we get some extra training? Or
Mm.
I'm worried about the maintenance. Is there any way we could start the maintenance later? Could we lower the monthly maintenance or things like that? And so those are all different things. What you're kind of looking for is something that's of high value to them, but really not of high value to you. And
Right.
that, because then that's a win for everybody, right?
Sure.
So if you do this, then if they answer, yes, I think we could get it done, then they've told you, yes, this can close. But I'm in our last session, I told you about this. This happened to me, right? I had a guy, he comes to me, he goes, I got this deal. We've given him a proposal. I'm trying to get it closed by the end of the quarter. Can I give him a discount? And I said, well, do this. And I had him write it down, right? Just ask him, say, does it make sense for us to see if we can do something special for you if we can get everything wrapped up by the end of the quarter? Okay.
Mm.
So he goes, well, what can we do? And I said, well, there's lots of things we can do. We can give him user group passes, or we can lower the maintenance, or we can
Mm.
give him an extra module, or, right?
Mm.
There's a bunch of stuff. He goes, well, can we do a discount? I go, yes, discounting is one of the options, right?
Mm.
But just go find out the timing. And then as a second step, we'll see what the concession
Sure.
is.
Yeah.
Okay. So he got all excited. He runs out of my office, right? So he comes back, or actually he didn't come back. I was walking. I was walking around in the hallway and I saw him looking kind of dejected. So I say, well, hey, how'd your call go with so-and-so? And he goes, oh, your question didn't work at all. He goes, in fact, the customer got mad and he told me to create a new proposal with a bigger discount on it. And I'm like going, whoa, that is not usually how that turns out, right? And so it just so happened that we had a phone system that was letting us audit the phone calls at that
Mm.
time. And so I thought, I'm going to go listen to that call. I'm going to
Yeah.
go listen to it. Here's what my guy said. Instead of saying, does it make sense for us to see if we can do something special? Instead of asking that, he says, I can get you a bigger discount if you'll close by the end of the quarter.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And that is totally different. Totally
Mhm.
different. It's in my new sales guy's mind, it was the same, right? But it was very, very different because in this case, what he's saying is, will you buy my stuff if I give you a discount, right? And that's
Mm.
very different than does it make sense, which
Right.
is about the timing. Okay.
Mm.
And here's what I also heard on this call. The guy says, he goes, I haven't even given the proposal I have now to our board yet. And we don't meet until the 15th of next month. So I could tell he was already sold. He already wanted it. He just couldn't pull together an impromptu meeting in the 2 days to get it done by the end of the quarter.
Yeah.
And so, and that's what made him mad, right? He put him in an awkward spot, like, hey, I'm not going to be able to get this discount because I can't pull my team together.
Mm.
So of course, what we did is we gave him a new discount. He's met his people on the 15th, and then we got the deal, but we got it with less margin because we had telegraphed that concession that might ripped it.
Yes.
So if he had just used it the right way,
wow,
he could have said, no, my guys don't meet till next month on the 15th. And we'd go, okay, great. Well, we'll catch up with you then. Right.
Yes.
But in any case, we got our deal, but we got it for lower margin. And that's the whole thing, is using something special preserves your margins without telegraphing any kind of a concession.
No, I like that change. So you're really qualifying, or the customer's qualifying themselves. They can change their timing or they can't. And then you get into, okay, yeah, what do you value out of the proposal more than other things? Is it price? Is it maintenance? Is it, some functionality or whatever? So,
yeah, when you ask the question to an executive or whatever, usually what you hear, if the positive answer is, they say, well, we're ready to do something if the deal's good enough. That's the kind of answer that you'll get back. And so if that is, then we go straight to what you just said, which is, okay, well, let's talk, what are you going to get the most value out of, right? Where can we help the most? Because there's usually lots of different things in our proposal that we can do. And I probably less than 50% of the time, is it about the price? I would say the majority of the time it's something other than the price that they're concerned about that's creating risk, and they're willing to lower their risk in a different way rather than just look at the dollars.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So James, we'll wrap up in a couple of minutes here, but it just reminds me, talking about price, there was something in your book where I really liked the way when you got the price question. You talked about getting the price question like early in the sales process, and then how you diverted that into doing more discovery. I really like that. And it's something I'm talking to some of my sales teams about, is not giving away too much too early in the sales process. And you're really like trading information, if you like, in a sort of a consistent, measured way. Because we're on these complex deals, we're on sort of a marathon here, right? It's a 6-month, 9-month process. And
Right.
I just wonder if you could talk about that a bit.
Sure. Well, they always bring it up, right? They always bring
Yeah.
it up. And so when they ask the early price question, what I like to say is, and this is the honest truth, is what has worked for me in my career is just to do a really good job for a client and have that client help me get other clients. That is the secret to selling, right? And so what I can tell you is that as long as we're a match, right? As long as I'm sure that we can produce a result for you and you're going to like what it works out as. I don't have to make $1 jillion on this. I just need to be in the black. So I promise you, I'll get you the best price possible. Let's just make sure that this is the right thing for you. And then we can move on to looking at what it is that they want to do rather than just focusing on the price at the beginning.
Yes.
Now, I will say that there's an exception to that. I use the force. And if the customer is telling me something about the price and I can tell by the way or whatever's going on in the environment, I may give them a range. I might say it's going to be between A and B.
You got to give them something sometimes, yes, but not everything. Or you can say, hey, it will be very competitive. You know, I assure you, we'll give you the best price we can, or something like that, right?
So you're going to put your intent out on the table and say, look, my goal is to get you the best opportunity. But right now, I don't know enough about you to know whether or not this is going to be a perfect fit. And honestly, for the stuff that I sell, I couldn't give them an accurate number if I wanted to because it's complicated. So I need to know a lot of things before we can get to that pricing stage.
Sure.
So what they're really doing at this point is they're just trying to see if they're either within a range or they're just testing you because they're curious. And so I just throw my intent out and say, I'll get you the best deal possible. But I'm going to say something else here that's your book has a really excellent chapter on referrals in it. Okay. Which are it's hands down the best sales channel that there is. Okay.
Absolutely.
And so when I tell them that really the secret to success in our organization is to do a great job for a customer, and then that customer will help me get another customer, I'm seeding the thought at that moment that I want them to help me get into other accounts. And then later, this price whole thing is going to come up again.
No, I like that. We've got to make it, part of our overall sales system, and it needs to be introduced early. The idea of referral, the idea of advocacy, and so forth. So I think that's great.
Later, when it comes up, I'll double down on. Say again.
Even introduce the concept of win-loss. Regardless of whether we go ahead or not, we'd really love to do a review with you afterwards on what we did well or what we can improve. Like that's the absolute best practice we could do.
Right, because then we can learn from our experience, regardless what we did good and what we could do better.
Yeah.
So there's more there, but I don't want to run over.
No problem. And also, I think another thing we do with that price question is qualified as well. It's interesting you ask about price at this stage. What's on your mind? What are you looking for? Maybe they're working on a business case. Maybe they're doing a draft for somebody, or it'd be good to know what's behind.
If they throw the early question out, sometimes I'll just ask them, have you given any thought to a budget for what you're trying to do here?
Yeah.
And if they say that they have, then I ask them, are you willing to share that with me?
Yes.
If they say yes, then now I have their budget, which is great. If they say no, then I sometimes, again, I use the force on this one. I might say, can you see yourself fitting between A and B? If you see if that works, then we can keep moving forward. If not, then, and I'll give you an example of that. I had a group that had 200 providers, which is a pretty big organization from a healthcare perspective in the United States. And so we thought we were doing so great with this group. This was going to be worth a lot of money to us. And we got really far into the process. I mean, we'd been working with these guys for a couple of months, and then finally it comes out that their budget was only like $60,000. And we were thinking millions, and their budget was $60,000. So if I had thrown that, can you see yourself between A and B at the very beginning of this particular sales process? Well, we could have saved ourselves about 2 months worth of work, because there was no chance ever that they were going to get inside the range that we thought it was going to be.
No, I think it's okay to throw out a range number early on, just sort of like can sometimes test whether this is real or not. And in that situation, that would have sorted that out pretty quickly.
Yeah. And I remember what I did as a rep to try to figure out what those numbers should be. I literally created proposals from a very small one all the way to a really big one. And I just took an average and I looked for a pattern in there. I said, okay, I can see it's basically this number times the number of providers that they have. And then I would say, all right, that's the low number. And then I'll give them a high number. We could go on forever, but there's a principle called anchoring, and you got to be really, really careful. They will only remember the lowest number that you give. So do not give a number that's any lower than what you can do, because you're going to be stuck at that point. So even the lowest number that you give needs to be a little bit higher, because they might want to negotiate with you at the end. And some customers, when they negotiate, they don't negotiate because they don't have money. There's a whole breed of person that only wants to negotiate because they need some kind of a win. And if you've already taken it all the way down to the bone, you won't have any way to give that person a win that they need, which is an emotional need. It's not a financial need.
Yeah, let's anchor high.
That's right. You could summarize that whole last 2 minutes with anchor high.
Absolutely. Well, James, really appreciate you coming on again and sharing with us. And I think we're all going to burn into our memories those two questions. Does it make sense to, or what would make sense for you, or what would you suggest? They're really fantastic questions, and then the more detailed options as well. So really appreciate that. Anything you want to finish on before we wrap up?
My pleasure. I think if we want, we could give some of your listeners an audiobook if they want to. Let's decide how we could do this. Maybe they're going to do a hashtag. Why don't they can hashtag growth acumen. Yes. And then they'll tag Stephen Norman and James Muir, right? Okay. My Twitter handle is B2B_sales tips. And if you tag us both, that's so we can actually see that you did it, and then we'll know. And we'll take the first 5, and I'll send you a link where you can download the audio.
Awesome. Perfect close. Okay, I'll put that into the show notes as well, so everyone can see that, and you can get a free copy of James's book. So, James, a really generous offer. Thanks very much.
Yeah.
And, hope to talk to you again soon. And thanks, everyone.
Thanks for having me on.
A pleasure. And thanks, everyone, for listening and watching. Look forward to engaging with you more. Bye for now.